1978, Ted Bundy, America's most notorious serial killer, is sentenced to death. The ultimate psychopath. He stalked, seduced, and then took sadistic pleasure, inflicting pain on those he captured, killing 30 or more young women. On death row, Bundy reveals his gruesome techniques to an impressionable young inmate who is soon to be released.
Trust me, it's all about Joan.
Now, for the first time, people close to the story are ready to speak out.
I have to tell you something, and it's going to change my life forever.
About what really happened when Bundy's protege embarked on his own reign of terror.
Police have confirmed that a predator is on the loose tonight, with a fourth body being found in the
Found dead at the scene, and the killer remains at large. The victim was beaten and left for dead.
And local residents have been urged to be vigilant.
Hillsboro, Oregon. A small, quaint city, just 20 miles from Portland.
Hillsboro at that time was a small community. People were very friendly.
I mean, it was a very nice place to live, very quiet. You'd never hear of anything happening as far as violence or crime.
But you always kind of think, well, your town is safe. My neighbors they're all good people. But in Hillsboro, that's changed now.
At the local Tuality Hospital, midwife Martha Bryant has just delivered Christina's baby.
Martha Bryant was positive, full of life, full of energy, full of jokes. Martha didn't have any children of her own. I think that her catching babies and being the first one to hold each and every one of them was like they were her babies. So.
At 1 a.m., Christina asks if Martha can come back for a photo with her and her newborn.
A nurse came in and said that she had gone home already and that we'd see her tomorrow. And I thought, okay, we have tomorrow. But we didn't.
At 1:45 a.m., the Hillsboro Police Department is hit by a flood of incoming 911 calls.
911.
There's a line in the road bleeding. I just passed him. The female in the roadway.
At the scene, they discover the body of a woman with a gunshot wound to the head, and her pants and underwear pulled down to her ankles. Despite that, it isn't clear if the woman was raped, and no DNA is recovered at the scene.
There was no semen, but there was either a sexual assault or an attempt at it.
But police do find other crucial evidence.
There were several spent casings, 9mm. Those bullets had been fired from a Browning 9mm pistol.
Using the bullet casings, as well as the eyewitness accounts from the 911 calls, Detective O'Connell reconstructs what he believes happened. After her shift ended, Martha left the hospital at 1 a.m. and started the 15-minute drive home.
Martha was coming from that direction.
The assailant who had been following her then accelerated up behind her car and began shooting.
He started firing his Browning 9mm into her car. One of those bullets hit her in the back, exited out her left lung. Because of the wound, she began to lose control of her car, and she pulled over right up here at this little drive. There was a witness in a house that heard a commotion.
My wife sat up and she asked me if I had heard gunfire, and I said, yeah, I think so. I said, but it can't be gunfire, it's probably our neighbor's car backfiring.
I went over to the window and actually opened it. I saw cars and I heard yelling.
The witness IDs the vehicle as a white muscle car, but cannot make out the perpetrator.
No, I wouldn't have been able to. It was too far away.
He removed her from her car, placed her in the back seat of his car, and he left eastbound on Cornell.
With Martha shot and seriously wounded in his car, the man drives a quarter of a mile away and pulls over in an unlit area.
She's dying. She's bleeding to death. He places a pistol to her temple and executes her, leaves her in the middle of the roadway with her pants down at her ankles. We believed initially that it was such an ugly, violent murder that it must have been someone that knew her.
Detective O'Connell heads to Martha Bryant's home and speaks to her husband.
Martha's husband was at home, and he did have a solid alibi, and he was pretty quickly eliminated as a suspect. I can't imagine receiving that kind of news, and to hear the horrific manner in which she was taken.
Martha's car is found abandoned outside the house where the gunshots were heard and taken to the police station for examination.
There was glass inside the car from the gunfire. There was some blood in the car. It all turned out to be hers.
All of Martha's colleagues and friends are questioned, but no one can think of anyone who would want to hurt the beloved midwife. That suggests that this senseless murder may have been completely random.
Crimes like this simply don't happen in Hillsborough, and the murder of Martha Bryant has left the residents in shock.
It impacted the community. It made people feel more vulnerable than they had before because it was such a random thing.
It's very scary for everybody.
It opened everybody's eyes, I think, that this can even happen here.
People really came away from that story feeling it could have been me. It could have been my daughter.
Police are on the lookout for a white muscle car in connection with the crime.
Police start pulling up records of all white muscle cars registered in the area and take witnesses around town to try to identify the correct make and model.
I spent a day with two of the detectives, and we went to used car lots looking for me to describe a car that was exactly like it. But I didn't see any just like it.
Over the weeks that follow, investigators make no headway in the search for Martha's killer.
1531.
Well, I think the noise that was heard was a vehicle accident.
Then, 3 months into the investigation,
just a short distance from intersection of Highway 47. There's a guardrail there, and it was right at that guardrail that the next body was found. "1992,
Ted Bundy, America's most dangerous serial killer, has been executed. But his friend from prison is released and is now on the prowl in the small town of Hillsboro, Oregon. A midwife who had just finished her night shift was forced off the road in a hail of gunfire and executed with a shot to the head. Police are looking for a white muscle car that was spotted driving away from the scene.
Obviously, we've got somebody out there who's committed a terrible crime, and we want to see them in custody.
1531.
Then, just 3 months later, the body of another woman is found.
Her body was 14 feet from the pavement. She had one leg tucked underneath her other leg. Her arms were splayed out over her head. And I located a gunshot wound underneath her chin.
It appears the victim has been shot at point-blank range, just like Martha Bryant. At the scene, they find a shell casing, and in her pocket is a small piece of paper with a number written on it.
There was some identification, so we did have a name. Shante Woodman. Her mother was the only relative.
Shante Woodman was a 20-year-old young woman that was exploring the world and doing good.
Shante's mother never recovered from the murder of her daughter. It just tore her up.
There were no witnesses to Shante's murder. But when the shell casing is sent off to forensics, it reveals a stunning connection. It was fired from the same Browning 9mm pistol that was used to kill Martha Bryant.
We were digging as deep as we could at that point and tried to identify people that Shante Woodman was an associate with and who might want to do her harm.
Then, a breakthrough. The numbers written on the paper in Shante's pocket turn out to be a phone number belonging to a man called Bill Koschel. He's quickly brought in for questioning.
We secured an interview room and told him we're there doing an investigation and we wanted to know about Shante Woodman.
Bill Koschel explains that he'd been dating Shante for the past couple of weeks. Things had been going well, but he hadn't heard from her since Saturday night when they went to see a band playing in town at a music venue called the Satiricon Club. Police then explain that Shante Woodman has been murdered.
He tried to speak to us about 3 times, and he could not talk. He had to compose himself.
Bill denies knowing anything about her murder. He tells detectives that after the band finished, he left to go to a party at a friend's house without her.
We had her photograph and utilized that to go down to the Satiricon Club. And when the customers were coming and going, we were sharing those photographs.
One of the customers remembers seeing Shante in the club just after the time Bill said he left. They also speak to several people who were at the party later with Bill. With his story confirmed, he's cleared as a suspect. To this day, Bill is haunted by his memories of that night.
We were talking in the Satiricon. It was one of those, you're just clicking with someone and, hours just fly. And then, oh gosh, I gotta go. I'll give you a call. And that's the last I saw of her.
Nobody saw Shante leave the club. but one young woman who was at the bar tells police she did see another girl running out of a car in terror later that same night. She says the young woman had bright red hair, was around 5 feet tall, and looked to be in her late teens. And the vehicle she was seen running from was a white muscle car.
That car was consistent with the midwife case.
Police urged the public to come forward with any information about the young woman with the bright red hair.
Anyone with information about the young lady is urged to contact the Hillsborough Police Department.
The news that a serial killer may be on the loose sends the residents of Hillsborough into a full-blown panic.
The bullets at the scene ballistically matched those used in the
When it
Bryant
became
murder.
known really what it was,
Martha Bryant.
a serial killer, that changed things. Because that is one of those things that you never think is going to happen in your town.
There was a great deal of fear, understandably so.
That was a changing point. That was a point where people realized there are bad people out there, and one of them is here.
So we always had that thought, is he hiding in plain sight?
And over the next 5 days, the tips flood in.
It was virtually impossible to turn the TV on without seeing some coverage on this case.
These are filled out, they're prioritized, and then we'll start to work on them.
We had binders and binders of tips.
Fortunately, one of those tips is from a man who saw a girl with bright red hair getting off at an intersection the night of Shanti's murder.
So my partner and I went up to that area and started knocking on doors. Probably didn't take us 15 to 20 minutes before someone said, "Oh, I know who you're looking for. She lives right there."
In Hillsborough, Oregon, investigators have been scouring the roads for a white muscle car connected with the execution-style murders of Martha Bryant and Shanti Woodman. Now they've tracked down a young woman who was seen running from a car matching that description on the night Shanti was murdered.
We started discussing the information, and she actually physically started shaking and told us that what we were discussing was the scariest moment in her life.
Alyssa explains that she was walking home from work when two men pulled up in the white car, and a guy she'd met the previous week asked if she wanted a ride home.
She didn't feel that she had any reason to feel suspicious or in danger around him from her past encounters, and so when they offered her a ride, she willingly got in on her own.
The males did not take her where she wanted to go. They took a side route and tried to sexually assault her at gunpoint. She refused to comply with any of their requests or demands. She said to the one fellow with the gun, "You're gonna have to shoot me."
After some period of time, for whatever reason, they decided to let her go. I'm really surprised that she survived that incident.
Alyssa's description of the car matches the white muscle car police have been searching for. And though she'd never seen the driver before, she reveals the name of the man she did know.
His name was Leonard Darcel.
Turns out, 21-year-old local Leonard Darcel has a long list of offenses.
When we pulled his mug, here was a young man with half his head shaved. There was one picture that showed him with a boot mark on the side of his face where he'd been involved in a fight. Most of the information we were getting regarding Leonard was somewhat of an antisocial personality.
But when investigators go to Darcell's house, they are told by his landlord that he has left town.
It was extremely frightening, knowing that there is a murderer prowling around.
Lorraine Bucknam lives in an apartment complex just blocks away from both the Martha Bryant and Shanti Woodman crime scenes. Lorraine and her boyfriend Cesar keep an eye out for their neighbor Betty Williams, who is also concerned and fearful.
Betty lived about 8 units down. Really sweet lady, somebody that you could talk to about anything. I'd call Betty maybe twice a week. We'd visit each other. You know, we were close. She was a great mother. She was very close with her kids. I knew the youngest one, Timmy, pretty well. He didn't have a family yet, and he spent a lot of time with her.
There you are, right there, see?
Little baby Timmy.
Little baby.
The meanest one.
Well, had little butch haircuts.
Okay, Betty Williams lived in this corner unit right here. She always had her door open, always fun to talk to. Such a sweet lady.
At 10:15 p.m. on the 21st of May, Betty's son Timmy tells police that he went to visit his mother after leaving work.
I have a key to her house, so I went in and I seen the light, the bathroom light out of the corner of my eye, so I ran to the bathroom and seen she was lying in the tub and her body was stiff and she was cold, so I figured she was gone.
Across the street, Lorraine hears a commotion coming from Betty's house.
I was in my apartment and I heard yelling. That was her son, Timmy, screaming, "Call 911, Mom's dead." So I ran out, "What's going on?" And I could tell by his face, I ran and dialed 911. He looked extremely horrified.
She was in the bathroom in the tub, partially clothed in 2 or 3 inches of water. The shower curtain was tangled up in her legs.
There's no blood at the scene. But next to the bathtub, there is a gun. It's a Browning 9mm. Forensic testing confirms what police already suspect.
It was the gun that was used to kill Martha Bryant and Shanti Woodman. He swabbed the inside of the barrel. It had Martha Bryant's blood in it.
But strangely, Betty Williams didn't suffer any gunshot wounds.
Betty Williams' death was ruled as a heart attack.
It looks like the Hillsborough serial killer has struck again. But as police canvassed Betty's neighbors, no one saw a man enter her house that night. With Leonard Darcell presumed to be on the run, Hillsborough PD contact other police departments in neighboring states to widen the search.
We'd gotten some information that Leonard had gone to Washington State. A few days earlier, we were told that he was working for a logger, and I believe the information came from his family. I drove up to Seattle.
But when Detective Ryan arrives,
Leonard left Washington State and told him he was going to go down to Oregon and take care of some things.
And then, investigators finally catch a big break.
We received new information that Leonard Darcell got booked into Clackamas County Jail in Oregon City for unrelated charges.
Detective Ryan goes to the nearby county jail to question the prime suspect.
I'm going to start the tape recorder now. Just advise you that you're being tape recorded, okay?
He gave us kind of a blank look as if he didn't have any clue what we're talking about.
We're talking about an incident involving Shantee Woodman.
His face suddenly turned red, and then the blood just rushed out of it. And then looked at us and said, "I'm going to talk to you fellows, but I have a feeling this is going to change my entire life." And we agreed that it probably would.
Where did you pick this girl up at?
I was right in the vicinity of the Satyricon.
According to Darcel, Shantee asked them to take her in the direction of Portland. But after driving for about 20 minutes, his friend pulls over to the side of the road.
And he stopped. And he pulled the pistol out of his pocket. He sat down, and he started like just playing with his gun. He told Chantel to get out of the car. He punched her. And then he'd tell her to stand up straight and hold still, and he'd punch her again. And he did it like 2 or 3 times. You know, like I couldn't breathe, I couldn't talk. You know, my throat was really tight, you know. He was laughing. She was pleading.
Do you remember her words?
I'll never forget her words. She said, "Please don't." She said she had so much to live for. And I said, "Get in the car." And I was halfway in the car. And I heard a pop, a gunshot.
And now, for the first time, Leonard Darcel has agreed to speak on camera and reveal horrifying new details about what really happened that night. A serial killer is terrorizing Hillsboro, Oregon. The prime suspect in the case, Leonard Darcel, claims he didn't kill any of the women, but he did invite Shantee Woodman into the car and watched as she was shot by his friend who was driving.
She did look at me just before it happened. And then I remember he got mad at her and told her to look at him. And so she looked back away and looked back at him. She was like trying to push the pistol out of her face and stuff, you know. And when she put her hands down, he pointed it underneath her chin and he shot her. I mean, nothing you could ever frickin' watch in the movies ever even seem is remotely accurate to what that's really like to see. She just crumpled like somebody extinguished the life right out from her, and she just literally like fell into a pile, you know, on the ground. There was nothing else in the entire universe except just that little bubble where we were. There's no noise, there's just what happened. That's all there is. He bent over and drug her off the road down into the ditch by the trees. He says, "Well, let's get in the car and leave." And so I get in the car and he got really excited. He's pounding on the steering wheel, punching the ceiling, hooting and hollering, all amped up. The detective asked me who did it. I told him his name was Cesar Barone.
The new boyfriend of Lorraine Bucknam, Betty Williams' friend and neighbor. Cesar Barone, a father of 2, had moved to Oregon 3 months earlier. Darcel first met him a couple of months before Shanti's murder at a friend's house.
I was 24. Barone come over to, hang out or do something. So he came in and he was like constantly telling me things about himself, about his life. He just wanted to be my friend.
When investigators run his name through their database, they quickly discover he's been using an alias.
Cesar Barone's real name was Adolph Rohde. He was from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
He had been married. He had a son. He'd been in the military. He was a handsome guy.
He was clean, wore clean clothes. He had like really white teeth. Women liked him a lot.
But he also had a very violent criminal past.
He had been arrested for several crimes, had spent years in the Florida prison system, had been arrested and tried, but acquitted for the attempted murder of his own grandmother.
But the most stunning twist of all is about to come to light.
For a time period in Florida, death row wasn't entirely separate from everybody else. Cesar Barone had been charged with having escape paraphernalia. He had attacked a female guard. The state of Florida had had enough of him, and they put him in their maximum security section, which included death row inmates, which included Ted Bundy. They told us, in fact, on 2 different occasions, Cesar Barone was housed next to Ted Bundy.
Other inmates confirm that Barone and Bundy spent a lot of time talking together while in prison. He is released in 1987 after spending 2 months in maximum security alongside Bundy, and he immediately follows in Bundy's footsteps.
He even moved to the Pacific Northwest, where Ted Bundy was from, to be in the presence of perhaps the country's most famous serial killer would be unsettling for most people. I'll bet it was a thrill to him. I bet it was an inspiration to him.
With Darcel's alibis checking out for the Martha Bryant and Betty Williams murders, investigators now know their serial killer is Cesar Barone. And then they make another shocking discovery. Cesar Barone had been working as a nurse's aide in a hospital.
Martha Bryant had worked with him, and they had some kind of an altercation at work at one point. So he had, I think, a bit of a vendetta toward her.
They arrest him at work. But when they go to his home to collect evidence, they're stunned by what they find.
Someone sets the house on fire. At the house was Cesar's roommate, who insisted he knew nothing about the fire. His beard was singed. So eventually, he said, "All right, here's what happened. Cesar called me from the jail. He said, burn the house, set the house on fire."
Detectives will have to wait to find out if any evidence in the house survived the fire. Meanwhile, they speak to his girlfriend Lorraine, who tells them she'd broken up with Cesar just a week earlier when his behavior took a dark turn.
There'd be times I would be talking to him, and it was almost as if there's nobody there, like if somebody had no soul. It might have been a matter of time before he decided to flip into killer mode and get me.
Then, as the prosecution works to build an airtight case against Barone, local journalist Eric Apalategui gets a letter from the jail where he's being held awaiting trial.
It just says, "Mr. Apalategui, I've given serious consideration in deciding whether or not to give an interview and to whom I would give it to. I have decided that it would be you."
Police have arrested Cesar Barone, the man they're convinced is the Hillsborough serial killer. From jail, Barone contacts journalist Erica Palategui and asks to meet for an interview.
And I said I would be happy to come to death row and talk to him. So this is what we have now on the computer. The Bryant case. Me sitting there, that looks like the one that they have the most evidence on.
They tell our juries to use common sense when evaluating evidence, right? I have nothing whatsoever to do with Martha Bryant's death.
He was very forceful to me that he was an innocent man. What about the bullet evidence in that case?
I know it didn't come out of my gun.
I think he felt like he could talk his way out of this whole thing. You know, if he just had the chance, he could tell a more convincing side of it.
But in the charred remains of Barone's house is a shocking piece of evidence that ties him to yet another unsolved murder. A year earlier, and 20 miles from Hillsborough in a nearby county, 64-year-old Margaret Schmidt was found suffocated in her home. Shoe prints were left at the scene. Now, in Barone's house, detectives discover a pair of sneakers.
A pair of Reebok ERS tennis shoes, size 9. The State Police Crime Lab identified artifact, a defect that could be caused by you stepping on a piece of glass or anything sharp.
The shoe and the footprint matched.
Police then discover that Cesar Barone sold his car soon after the murder of Shanti Woodman, and records reveal that the car he had been driving was a white muscle car. They track down the vehicle, and inside discover a treasure trove of damning evidence.
The Oregon State Police Crime Lab comes out. She looks at the back seat. She goes, "That spot has been cleaned more vigorously than the rest of the car." She pulls out a sterile box cutter knife, slices open the seat. The cushion underneath the seat was soaked in blood, and that was determined through DNA to be Martha Bryant's blood.
Before his trial, Barone's current cellmate comes forward with chilling testimony about his crimes.
When did these conversations between you and Cesar begin?
They started approximately 5 days ago and have continued through this evening.
He said, "Had this been a drug murder," he said, "you would have never heard a word from me. But this is just sick, twisted stuff."
It was beyond bizarre even to those guys who had spent much of their life in prisons.
Like Ted Bundy, Cesar enjoyed bragging about his horrific crimes to cellmates.
Has he mentioned Ted Bundy to you?
Yes.
In what term?
He's infatuated with him.
Does he idolize him?
Yes, absolutely.
Has Barone talked to you about a murder involving a nurse or midwife?
In death, he shot her.
Where?
In the temple. He showed.
He used bars of soap and candy bars to show the respective locations of his vehicle with Martha Bryant's vehicle.
He would jump around. He'd jump up on the bunk. He'd rub his crotch. You know, he was enthralled with it. It's what he lives for, man. And you can tell he's a pervert. That's his whole thing in life.
And it wasn't just Martha's murder he boasted about.
He was attempting to rape Betty Williams.
And she was just scared. She was real scared. And all of a sudden, you know, he could tell she was starting to have, you know, a heart attack.
She died of a heart attack, that is true. But she died of a heart attack because of the attack he was doing to her and the threats and the fear. I mean, he killed her. He scared her to death.
In December 1994, Cesar Barone is found guilty of the murder of Martha Bryant. He is sentenced to death. He receives separate death sentences for the murders of Shanti Woodman and Margaret Schmidt, and a life sentence for the murder of Betty Williams. Like Ted Bundy, Cesar Barone was handsome and appealing, with many girlfriends and well-liked by neighbors.
He had enough of that charm that if someone was vulnerable to it, they could be taken in.
Nothing stood out. He didn't look sinister, evil.
But behind the mask was a depraved monster.
Cesar Barone broke all the rules in terms of criminal profiling. Betty Williams was in her 50s. Margaret Schmidt, 65 years old, killed in her home. Shantee Woodman, 23 years old, left out on the side of the highway. Martha Bryant, victim of this hail of gunfire. He killed by himself. He killed with a partner. Now, was this intentional to throw us off? I don't know. I hate to give him that much credit, but